What's up you guys, I'm Dan, this is Frugal Not Cheap, and today we'll look at the economics of buying a used Tesla Model S. If you haven't seen my last video, I shared that I recently purchased a 2017 Tesla Model S 75 rear-wheel drive. It's an amazing car. I still feel like I'm dreaming every time I look out the window at it or jump into the driver's seat, of course. But this being a personal finance channel, of course, we've got to talk about the financial impacts of this decision. My hope with this video is to help give you a framework for how to think about the decision of buying a used car to some degree, and especially how to think about that decision for electric vehicles. So I think what we can do is break up the economics of this purchase into 6 different categories. We've got purchase price, fuel or electricity costs, routine maintenance, repairs, because things are going to go wrong, insurance, and finally depreciation. First, let's look at the purchase price. I paid $38,000 for my 2017 Tesla Model S. It had 60,000 miles, a single owner, and no accidents. I did a search on CarGurus for 2017 models that had under 61,000 miles and were going for between $37,000 and $38,000, also with a single owner and with no accident. Oh, and also 5-star average crash safety rating from the NHTSA or NHTSA. So those were the criteria, and I was pretty surprised to see that all but one of the results that came up on CarGurus were for Mercedes-Benz E-classes. So if you don't know the Mercedes range, the C-Class is the kind of the entry-level one, or C for cheap. Then you've got the E for expensive, that's the mid-level trim. And then you've got the S-Class for super expensive. And then of course you've got the Maybach models above that. So this is kind of the mid-tier Mercedes, and all but one of the results were this E-Class. The only other result was a Dodge Challenger, which is a vehicle that I don't personally would have any desire to own. So why? Well, I'm just not really into the American muscle car aesthetic. Sure, it'd be fun to drive one of those in a straight line at one point, but to own one, it's not really my style. And I mean, look at this interior. By contrast, here's the E-Class interior. So, based on this search, I do think it will make sense to compare my used 2017 Tesla Model S against a used E-Class from the same model year. And of course, I'll be comparing against my old car, which was an Acura TSX from 2010. The reason for that is we should also talk about what's the change in my finances from then to now. Although, you know, spoiler alert, obviously it was a spendy thing to do. We're going from having a 2010 car that had, you know, depreciated quite heavily, has lower insurance costs, it's a very reliable car, to moving to a much more expensive car like a Tesla Model S. So you can imagine that obviously it's going to cost a little bit more on a monthly and yearly basis. Now, before we move on from the topic of purchase price, however, I'm sure you're thinking about, well, $38,000 is a lot of money. What if I use that to buy a new car instead? So what could we get for $38,000? I put in the same price range of $37,000 to $38,000 into CarGurus, looking at new vehicles instead. And we came up with a ton of options that still had a 5-star crash safety rating. We had over 3,000 listings for sedans that had these criteria. Most were Nissan, over 1,100 of them, followed by Hyundai at 665. Then there were 530 Toyotas and 237 Hondas. I should mention at this point, though, that the average purchase price for a new vehicle for Americans has climbed significantly over the last decades and is now at $40,000. In fact, as you can see from the brands that I listed, the vast majority of the search results on CarGurus were for pretty run-of-the-mill kind of mundane cars. Things like a Camry or an Avalon Hybrid, high trim level Nissan Altimas, a Honda Accord Touring, that kind of thing. Looking at the luxury makes of this price point, we had 0 BMWs, 0 Lexus cars, and 0 Mercedes. We did have some Acura TLXs and some Audi A3s. So these are some options at this price point for a new vehicle, which of course would come with the new vehicle warranty. However, they would depreciate quickly. As I've talked about in previous videos, cars tend to lose about half their value within the first 4 or 5 years. And at the same time, I would argue that having a new TLX or even an Audi A3 is quite a different experience from owning even a used Mercedes E-Class or a Tesla Model S. To make that point a little more, a new E-Class costs about $60,500, and my car started at $69,500 in 2017, but it came with enhanced autopilot, which was $5,000, and it also came with a premium upgrades package at $3,500 for a total cost of $78,000. Maybe you can see why I like buying used cars that have depreciated quite a bit, but are expected to still be reliable. In fact, my Acura TSX in the 9 years that I owned it had zero unexpected issues. It was all just routine maintenance and tires, except I got a little bit of junk in the track for one of the rear windows, and so they just had to open up the door, clean that out, and the window was working perfectly again after that. Alright, so all that being said, I think the take-home point here on the purchase price is that used vehicle depreciation is absolutely something that I like to take advantage of. Okay, now let's look at running costs. And of course, prices are going to vary state by state, but what we can do is look at what the costs are here in New Hampshire, where I'm based, and then also the national average. Now, my Acura TSX used premium gasoline, and the Mercedes E-Class, of course, will use premium gasoline as well. And here in New Hampshire, the premium gasoline price was recently $3.70 per gallon. Supercharging from Tesla cost me 25 cents per kilowatt hour, and charging at home cost me about 17 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, one thing to be careful of is if you just look at the rate per kilowatt hour on your bill, you might think it's quite low. For instance, here I'm showing about 6 or 7 cents per kilowatt hour for the electricity itself. But that doesn't include all of the other charges that go along in the bill. When I do the math, it actually ends up being a marginal cost of over double that. So that's something that if I were you, I would keep an eye on in your electricity bill as well, figure out how much it actually costs per additional kilowatt hour that you use. We can see that with an average efficiency of 27 miles per gallon, which is what my TSX got, and by the way, the E-Class is a little bit worse if you're talking about the V6, I think it was a 6-cylinder engine anyway. Mercedes was about 23 miles a gallon. My TSX cost about $28 to go 200 miles, whereas filling up my Model S at the supercharger would cost quite a bit less, $15 for the same thing, a savings of over 45%. And charging at home is even cheaper, costing just $10 to go 200 miles, which is a savings of over 60%. And again, these numbers are even slightly better when comparing against an E-Class with a 23 mile a gallon efficiency. That's $33 to travel 205 miles on gas, meaning we'll save 54% using the supercharger, and we'll save 69% doing home charging. Now, let's look at the national averages. As you can see, the supercharger savings are slightly smaller at 42% against my TSX. That's 51% against an E-Class. But the home charger savings are larger at 76% and up to 79% against the E-Class. Now, of course, how much you're going to save will depend on how much you drive. For someone like me, who drives just 8,000 miles a year at $3.70 a gallon, my TSX would cost about $1,100 in gas per year. Supercharging the Model S for the same distance would save about $500 a year, and we'd save just about $700 a year using home charging on the Model S. Ooh, one more thing before we move on from this. It's worth pointing out that I could actually cut down these these fuel costs down to zero, because I can just go over down to Eversource and they have free charging there, and it's fairly fast. It can charge at about the rate of 20 miles an hour, 28 to 22 miles an hour, and so I could easily get by on just that. It's just a little bit less convenient. I really like the ability to plug in when I get home and wake up with a full tank. Right, so that's pretty awesome. I'm willing to pay a little bit of a premium for it, but again, it's a lot less than gasoline. And by the way, there are a lot of free charging solutions out there across the country. It's not just something that's unusual about the Eversource charge point nearby. So on these charging costs, definitely electric beats out gas, and especially so for home charging rather than the supercharger. Great, now let's look at regular maintenance. One of the huge benefits to having an electric vehicle over a gasoline vehicle is that there's just way less moving parts, right? I mean, just in the engine alone, you have a lot of moving parts. Then you have a transmission, it's just there's a whole lot more going on with a gasoline car, and things that can go wrong or things that need to be regularly serviced. Here's a crazy thought that struck me the other day when I was looking at my car. I don't need any oil changes, right? That's something that's a very routine thing that you've got to do with a gas car. No oil changes in the Model S. Another thing is I had a bottle of coolant for my old car. Had a bunch left over, and I was looking around the Model S, no place to put it. There's some coolant for the battery, but that's something that Tesla will service themselves only. Otherwise, you avoid the warranty. And that's something that they only look at like every 3 years or something like that, just to check if it's still in good shape. So even there, nothing to do. In fact, the only fluid I can add to the Model S is putting in windshield washer fluid. Okay, so let's look now at a gas car. Taking the example of the E-Class, here are the regular service items and how much they tend to cost. Service A includes an oil change, which again, you won't have in a Tesla. Filter changes, which you do in a Tesla, the cabin filter and the HEPA filter if you've got one every few years. And also topping up fluids, which again in the Tesla you've only got windshield wiper fluids. And then the B service includes everything in service A, as well as the brake fluid and some other extras. According to Motor One, the annual maintenance cost of Mercedes is around $910. For Tesla, here's the cost of the routine items. Now, tire rotations do need to be done a little bit more often on an electric vehicle like a Tesla, just because they're very heavy and also because they have instant torque, which is a lot of fun, by the way. But again, we have no oil changes, and it's very rare to need to flush and change any fluids. Also, things like even the brake pads and calipers wear out very, very slowly because of the regenerative braking. And the differences end up being quite large. Again, according to Motor One, our annual maintenance cost for the Model S should come out to an average about just $300. That's a huge savings against the Mercedes. For those of you that know Tesla, it shouldn't be any surprise that there are savings for service costs, as they've stated that they're really just trying to break even on service. It is not a profit arm for them. Whereas for traditional car dealerships, of course, service is a big, big profit center for them. So the take home here is the electric drivetrain is much more cost effective to maintain, and that we would save some $610 against having a Mercedes. Now let's look at repairs. Of course, things are going to wear out and will need fixing. And it's kind of a matter of luck and probability as to which are the things that are going to break and relatively how expensive they're going to be. But we can still kind of look at an average and look at the table of costs and get some idea here, even though each individual's experience is going to vary. So here's a table of some different costs for repairing a Model S. And here we have a similar table for the Merc. So I'd summarize by saying that repairs are really not cheap for either. And this is a great place to throw a big caution out there. I remember the first episode of Top Gear that included James May as the new presenter. So this is really kind of the first real episode of Top Gear, because they had this other guy for a little while. Anyway, he presented that he had bought a used Bentley. But of course, then he talked about how ridiculously expensive it is to own a used Bentley, where things are falling apart and all the repairs are very expensive.
Right then, a Bentley for Mondeo money. Some of you are pretty tempted by this idea, but hang on. I haven't told you how it ruined my life yet.
So I would caution you that while my philosophy is to buy a car that's used and depreciated quite significantly over those first 4 or 5 years, that whatever car you choose though should be one where you're able to afford the running costs and any potential repairs, which is the reason why I wouldn't go out and buy a Porsche or something like that. Unless I could afford those kinds of really hefty repair bills. Meanwhile, repair costs for a 5-year-old Toyota Corolla or a 5-year-old Honda Civic are going to be much more reasonable. Now, just to get some averages, here's some data from RepairPal. And we can see that the average repair costs for a Tesla annually at $300 a year are a lot less than the others, and way less than the $790, almost $800 for the Merc. So again, on repairs, we can say that electric, and especially Tesla, because of their philosophy, can be significantly cheaper on average, especially compared to the Merc. Now I know it looks a little bit like we're picking on Mercedes a lot, but they just happen to be the used car for the same year that came up in this price band. But I would also say, alright, so on a positive, definitely Mercedes are built very, very solidly. They're great vehicles to drive when they're operating normally. And I'll say that they have perhaps best in class interiors right now. The things that they're doing with just the interior materials, the ergonomics, the layout, the speaker grills, just beautiful. But it is also no secret that Mercedes vehicles tend to depreciate very quickly, right? They tend to not have the best reliability, and they tend to have very expensive repair costs to go along with that. Alright, next we've got insurance. Now, of course, it's generally going to cost more to insure a more expensive vehicle, as repair costs are going to cost more, and the insurer will have to factor that into the premiums. With my Acura TSX, I was paying just $500 a year for comprehensive coverage, but of course that car had depreciated down to around between $6,000 and $8,000 since it had nearly 100,000 miles and was getting quite old, being in 2010. Covering my Model S costs significantly more, a little over $1,400 a year at the moment. But I am hoping to be able to cut that down again because Tesla Insurance is going to start operating not just in California, but they are working to open up shop in the state of Illinois and also in the state of Texas, where I'll be moving to. For now, though, I'm seeing on the web that insuring a new E-Class costs about $1,800 a year, so probably a used E-Class will be something comparable to what I'm doing with my Tesla right now. So to summarize, it's a draw, and ouch, it's a bit expensive. Hopefully we'll be able to save some money with Tesla insurance when that's available. Alright, and then the final point to look at is going to be depreciation. And of course your luxury vehicles tend to depreciate much more rapidly than some very sort of reliable mainstream vehicles like, say, I don't know, a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic doesn't depreciate all that quickly compared to something like a Mercedes S-Class. Here are some charts from Car Edge. And here we can see that the Model S does tend to hold its value a little bit better than the E-Class. Much better than an Acura RLX. I put that in there for comparison because they're a very reliable brand. It's basically Honda. And the Model S ends up being close to or better than the industry average after a few years. Here's another way to look at it. This is the deviation in the depreciation rate against the industry average for all of them. And again, serves to highlight the fact that the Model S does quite well. And finally, I'd say that there is kind of a big question as what's going to happen with the valuation of Teslas. It's kind of the crazy thing again about Teslas is that you have a car that was built a long time ago, but it continues to improve as the software updates improve, and that's something you don't see with the legacy automakers. So my car does have the full self-driving. I'm going to get the hardware for full self-driving installed this Friday, Good Friday. But my point is, though, that it is possible that my vehicle could appreciate significantly for a brief time anyway, until the full self-driving software becomes more ubiquitous. But for some time before that happens, it could actually become a lot more valuable because it'll have the ability to essentially drive itself, and even along the way, it will be gaining more and more abilities to do this kind of thing and other cool software updates that Tesla will think of. So really excited to see how that goes during the time that I have this car. I really, really love the car. And to sum up, obviously my Model S is much more expensive to have than my Acura TSX was, but it also provides a pretty amazing driving experience and being chauffeured around almost kind of experience. And there are many, many ways in which an electric car like the Model S is cheaper than its gasoline rivals. All that being said, I do want to restate that stretching by buying a used car and ending up with a car that you wouldn't have been able to afford the maintenance and repairs for originally as a new car is not a good idea. So if a Model S is a bit more of a stretch, then there are other options, and there will be more coming onto the used market over the next couple of years, such as a Tesla Model 3 or a Tesla Model Y. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to help out the channel by hitting the like, putting some comments down below if you have any, and subscribing to the channel. And I'll see you in the next video.